I have been driving for a mid-sized freight company for about 6 years now, mostly regional routes through Pennsylvania and Ohio. Most of my job is boring in the best way. Pick up a load, drop it off, sign some papers, go home. I am telling you this story because one night, a delivery came through dispatch that I still think about, and I still don't have an answer for what happened. It was a Thursday night, a little after 9, when my dispatcher called with a rush order. A small residential delivery, just a handful of sealed boxes, going out to a house on a street called Hollow Bend Lane in a town I had never heard of before, even though I had driven every road in that county at least a dozen times. I told my dispatcher I couldn't find the town on my GPS. She told me to just follow the directions written on the paperwork instead, because sometimes older addresses don't load right in the system. I should have pushed back harder than I did. But the delivery paid a rush bonus, and it was late, and I wanted to get it done and go home. The directions on the paper were strange from the start. They didn't use highway names or exit numbers like normal directions. They said things like turn left at the dead oak tree and continue past the old grain silo until the pavement ends. I followed them anyway, mostly because I had nothing else to go on. About 20 minutes off my usual route, my GPS screen went completely blank, just a gray square where the map should have been, even though my signal bar showed full strength the entire time. The road eventually turned from pavement to gravel, then to something that was barely more than packed dirt. I remember checking the clock on my dash. It read 11 minutes past 10 at night, and I remember thinking that felt wrong somehow, like more time had passed than that. The trees on either side of the road grew thick and close, blocking out what little moonlight there was, and for a long stretch I couldn't see anything at all except what my headlights caught directly in front of me. Then, without any real warning, the trees opened up and I was driving into a small town. Except calling it a town doesn't feel quite right. It was maybe a dozen houses arranged around a short main street with a gas station that had pumps I hadn't seen the design of since I was a kid, and a diner with a hand-painted sign advertising a cup of coffee for a price that made no sense for today. Every window in every house was lit up with a warm yellow light, but I didn't see a single person outside, not one car parked on the street, not one dog barking, nothing. As I drove slowly down the main street looking for the house number, I passed that diner again, and for just a moment I thought I saw movement inside, a shape passing behind the glass. I slowed down to look closer, but there was nothing there, just empty booths and a counter with stools all pushed in neatly, like it had been closed for the night. Except every light inside was still on and a radio was clearly playing somewhere, faint music with a kind of static crackle that sounded like it was coming from decades ago, rather than any static crackle that sounded like it was coming from decades ago rather than any station I had ever picked up on my own truck radio. I found the house on Hollow Bend Lane exactly where the directions said it would be, a small white house with a porch light on. An older man answered the door before I even knocked, like he had been standing right behind it waiting for me. He smiled and thanked me for the delivery, said it right on time, and asked me to carry the boxes inside instead of just leaving them on the porch, which was unusual, but I didn't want to argue. I carried them into a small front room, and that is when I noticed the calendar hanging on the wall. It was open to a month and year that didn't match anything close to the present. I told myself it was probably just an old calendar he kept up for decoration. Plenty of people do that. But then I noticed the stack of newspapers on his side table, yellowed and curling at the edges, with a date on the top, one that matched the calendar exactly. Not a novelty. Not decoration. It looked like time in that house had simply stopped moving forward at some point, and nobody around here had noticed, or maybe nobody wanted to. I asked him to sign the delivery slip so I could get going, trying to keep my voice steady. He signed it slowly, almost lovingly, like he didn't get many visitors and wanted to make the moment last. When he handed the clipboard back to me, I glanced down at the date he had written next to his signature, and it matched the newspapers. Not today's date. A date from years and years ago, written in handwriting so smooth and certain it didn't look like a mistake at all. I thanked him and turned to leave, and that's when he said something that I still hear in my head some nights when I can't sleep. He told me, very gently, that I couldn't leave town until my delivery was properly logged at the general store down the street, and that everybody who comes through has to do the same thing before they go. I laughed a little, thinking it was some kind of local custom or joke, and told him I really needed to get back on the road. His smile didn't change at all, but his eyes did, just slightly. going flat and empty in a way that made every hair on my arms stand up. I didn't wait to hear anything else. I walked straight back to my truck, climbed in, and started driving, not toward the general store, but back the way I had come. As I pulled away, I looked in my mirror and saw him still standing on the porch, not moving, not waving, just watching me go. Every single house I passed on my way out had someone standing at the window, watching too, still and quiet, none of them moving a muscle. The dirt road felt endless going back, twice as long as it had felt coming in, and for a stretch of several minutes I began to wonder if I would ever find the pavement again. Then, all at once, my GPS screen flickered back to life, the map filling back in like nothing had ever happened, and pavement appeared under my tires again. I didn't stop driving until I reached a well-lit gas station on a real highway, hands shaking so badly I could barely pump my own fuel. When I got back to the terminal the next morning, I asked my dispatcher about the address, about the town, about any record of that delivery order at all. She pulled it up on her computer and told me there was no record of any delivery going out to a Hollow Bend Lane, not that night, not ever, in the entire history of the company's system. She said the only note on my shift log from that night was a single rush delivery listed simply as completed, with no address attached to it at all, like the system itself didn't know where I had gone. I still have the delivery slip from that night, folded up in my glove compartment, the one with his signature and that impossible date written on it in careful, steady handwriting. I have shown it to a couple of the other drivers at my company, half expecting them to laugh at me. But instead, one older driver went quiet and said he had heard something similar once from a man who doesn't work here anymore. A story about a town that only shows up for drivers who take a wrong turn at exactly the right moment, though he couldn't remember any more details than that, or maybe he just didn't want to. I have never been able to find that road again, no matter how many times I have tried to retrace my route during daylight hours when I'm not afraid. Some part of me hopes I never find it again. Another part of me, the part that can't stop thinking about that old man alone on his porch waiting patiently for the next delivery, wonders if the road will find me instead, whenever it decides it's ready, and whether next time I will be the one signing my name next to a date that doesn't belong to me anymore. For 3 nights in a row, I woke up in my sleeper cab absolutely certain that someone had been lying right next to me, close enough to feel their breath on my neck, and each morning there was a fresh handprint pressed into the fog on the inside of my window. I drive a truck with a sleeper cab, which means my truck is basically my home for most of the month. There is a small bed behind the driver's seat, just enough room to stretch out, a curtain that separates it from the front of the cab, and a little window on the side that I usually crack open for air. I have slept in that same bed for almost 4 years without a single problem. Through thunderstorms, through freezing nights in the mountains, through parking lots so loud with idling engines that I learned to sleep through anything. I always figured that if there was one place in the world I felt completely safe, it was inside that little curtained-off space at the back of my cab. Then, about 2 months ago, something changed, and I still don't fully understand what it was or if it's really gone. It started on a night I was parked at a rest stop somewhere in western Kansas. Nothing special about the location, just a regular stop I had used probably 50 times before. I fell asleep around midnight the way I always do, tired from a long day of driving. I woke up sometime later, and I don't know the exact time because I didn't check my phone right away, but it still felt like the deep middle of the night, the kind of hour where everything outside is completely silent. What woke me up was a feeling, not a sound. A feeling that someone was lying in the bed with me, close enough that I could sense body heat radiating from just behind my shoulder. I turned over fast, heart already pounding, and there was nothing there. Just my blanket, rumpled up like it always gets. I told myself it was a dream, some strange half-asleep sensation that felt more real than it actually was, and I eventually fell back asleep. In the morning, getting ready to start my drive, I noticed something on my little side window that made my stomach drop. A handprint, pressed clearly into the condensation on the inside of the glass, fingers spread wide, small enough that it looked almost like a child's hand, but too oddly shaped to be a kid's. I wiped it away and told myself I must have done it myself somehow, half asleep, without remembering. The second night, it happened again, except this time I heard something too. A slow, steady breathing sound, coming from right behind me, not fast or panicked like my own breathing, but calm and even. Like whoever it belonged to wasn't scared at all. I laid completely still, too frozen to turn around, listening to that breathing continue for what felt like several full minutes before it simply stopped, all at once, like someone had been holding it in and finally let it go. When I worked up the nerve to turn over, again, nothing was there. But when I checked the window that morning, the handprint was back, in the exact same spot as before, same size, same shape. By the third night, I was genuinely afraid to sleep in my own truck, but I didn't have much choice. I was 2 days from home with a full load and a schedule to keep. I decided to leave the little dash camera I keep for insurance purposes running that night, angled back toward the sleeper area instead of the road, just in case. I fell asleep sometime around 1 in the morning, telling myself I was just being paranoid, that trucking alone for long stretches does strange things to a person's mind after enough years. I woke up gasping, sitting straight up in the dark, absolutely certain that something had just been sitting on the edge of my mattress, and that the weight had shifted away only the second before I opened my eyes. The mattress beside me still held a clear indentation, a shape pressed down into it like something had been sitting there for a while, curled slightly, about the size of a small adult or maybe a teenager. I did not move for a long time. I just stared at that indentation slowly losing its shape as the mattress foam pushed back up until there was nothing left to prove it had ever been there at all. I didn't look at the dash camera footage until I reached a well-lit truck stop the next morning, sitting in the driver's seat with the doors locked and the engine running, needing the noise and the daylight around me before I could make myself watch it. Most of the footage was exactly what you'd expect. Several hours of a dark, still cab, my own shape barely visible under the blanket, shifting occasionally the way anyone does in their sleep. But around 2 in the morning, something changes. The footage doesn't show a person, not clearly, nothing you could point to and call a face or a body. But there is a shift in the darkness along the edge of the frame, a kind of thickening in the shadow near the foot of the bed that wasn't there a few seconds earlier, and it stays like that, completely still, for almost 11 minutes straight, before thinning back out into ordinary darkness like it had simply been absorbed by the rest of the cab. I watched that same 11 minutes probably 20 times, trying to convince myself it was a trick of the camera, bad lighting, a smudge on the lens, anything with a normal explanation. I still don't have one. What scared me more than the shape itself was something I noticed on maybe the 5th or 6th time watching it. Right at the very end of those 11 minutes, just before the shadow thins back to normal, there's a faint sound picked up by the camera's built-in microphone, quiet under the hum of the engine. "It's my name," said once softly, in a voice that isn't mine and isn't anyone else's I recognize either. I did some research after that, mostly out of desperation, looking for other drivers online who might have experienced something similar in their sleeper cabs. I found a surprising number of posts on trucking forums describing almost the exact same thing: an unexplained handprint on the inside glass, a feeling of pressure on the mattress at night, even a few other drivers mentioning their own name being whispered somewhere in the cab during the deep hours of early morning. Nobody had an explanation. A few people suggested it might be tied to specific trucks rather than specific routes or locations. Like whatever this is doesn't belong to a place at all, but to certain vehicles, riding along with them from state to state, driver to driver, for reasons nobody could guess at. One post that stuck with me was from a driver who said he traded in his truck after 2 years of the same experience and swore that the very next owner, a man he happened to run into at an auction lot almost a year later, described the exact same handprint on the exact same window, in the exact same spot, without ever having heard the first driver's story at all. I still drive that same truck today, mostly because I can't afford to simply walk away from it, and my company wasn't exactly sympathetic when I tried explaining why I wanted a different one. The handprints still show up every so often, not every night anymore, but often enough that I've stopped being surprised by them. I've started sleeping with the curtain open now instead of closed, and the little window cracked, telling myself that whatever it is seems to prefer the dark and the quiet, and maybe a little airflow and a sliver of parking lot light will be enough to keep it settled. Some nights, right before I fall asleep, I still feel that same warmth behind my shoulder, that same slow and steady breathing, that same sense that I am not entirely alone back there. I have stopped trying to turn around and look. Some part of me has decided it's better not to know for certain, as long as whatever is riding with me keeps deciding, every single night so far, to let me wake up in the morning. But I still keep that dash camera running, pointed at the bed, every single night now, and I still haven't worked up the courage to watch all the way through a single recording since. I need to explain something about myself first, because it matters for the rest of this story. I have one rule I have never broken in 12 years of driving trucks. I do not pick up hitchhikers. Ever. My old training supervisor drilled that into me my first year on the road, and he had a good reason. A friend of his picked up a stranger outside Amarillo back in the 90s and never made it home. He told that story to every new driver who came through, and it stuck with me the way certain stories do, planting a small cold seed of fear that never fully went away, so I don't stop. Not for anybody, not for years. Until one night in October, I did. It was a little past 10 at night, and I was hauling a load of furniture through a stretch of back road in northern Missouri, the kind of road with no streetlights and no shoulder to speak of. A storm had rolled in about an hour earlier, the kind of rain that comes down sideways and makes your wipers useless. I was going slow, hunched over my wheel trying to see the white line, when my headlights caught a shape standing on the edge of the road. A girl. No coat, no umbrella. Just standing there in the rain like she was waiting for a bus that was never going to come. I don't know why I stopped. I have asked myself that question probably 100 times since. Something about the way she was just standing there, not even trying to flag me down, made my stomach turn in a way I still can't explain. I pulled over anyway. She got in without saying much. Just a quiet thank you, and her teeth were chattering from the cold. She was soaked completely through, her hair stuck flat to her face, water running off her jacket and pooling on my seat. I remember thinking I'd need to clean that seat later. She said her name was Mara and that her car had broken down a few miles back. I offered to call for help, but she said her phone was dead and asked if I could just take her as far as the next town. We talked for a while. Normal things at first, where I was hauling from, how long I'd been driving. But then she said something that made my hands go cold on the wheel. She asked about my daughter, Emily, and asked if she still had that stuffed rabbit she used to carry everywhere when she was small. I have never told a stranger about my daughter's rabbit. I have barely told anyone. It was a private thing, something only my ex-wife and I ever talked about. I asked Mara how she knew that, and she just smiled and looked out the window like she hadn't heard me. A few minutes after that, I glanced over at her out of the corner of my eye, just to check on her, and I noticed something small that I brushed off at the time. She hadn't blinked once since she got in the truck. I told myself I was being paranoid, that I just hadn't caught her doing it, and I focused back on the road. Then I happened to check my side mirror to change lanes around a stalled car up ahead, and for just a second, I could have sworn the mirror showed an empty passenger seat, even though I could see her sitting right there when I looked over with my own eyes. I told myself the rain was playing tricks with the glass. About 20 minutes in, I happened to glance down at her seat, and that is when the fear really started. She had been dripping wet when she climbed in, water running down the seat and onto the floor mat. But now, less than half an hour later, the seat was completely dry. Not just drying. Dry like it had never been wet at all. Her clothes were dry too. Her hair, which had been plastered flat against her face, was falling loose and soft like she'd just stepped out of a warm house. I didn't say anything. I just kept driving, my heart pounding so hard I could feel it in my ears. A few miles later, without me asking anything, she turned to me and said very calmly that I should not take the exit for the Miller Creek Bridge tonight. She said it twice, like she needed me to understand it. I asked her why, and she just said the bridge wasn't safe tonight and left it at that. I kept my eyes on the road for maybe 10 seconds, trying to process what she'd said. When I looked back over at the passenger seat, it was empty. Completely empty. The door was still shut. My truck was moving at nearly 50 miles an hour down a straight stretch of road with no turns, no stops, nothing she could have jumped out onto. She was simply gone, like she had never been sitting there at all, except for one thing. The seat, which had been bone dry a moment ago, was now soaking wet again, water dripping steadily onto the floor mat exactly the way it had when she first got in. I pulled over right there in the middle of the road, shaking so badly I could barely put the truck in park. I sat there for a long time, staring at that wet seat, trying to convince myself I had imagined the entire thing. But the water was real. I touched it myself. It was cold, like rainwater that had been sitting outside for hours, not the warm rain that had been falling that night. I had a decision to make. The Miller Creek exit was coming up in about 2 miles, and it was the fastest way to get back to the highway. Every part of my logical brain told me to just take the exit and get this delivery finished. But I couldn't shake what she'd said, the way she'd said it twice like it actually mattered. So I took the long way instead, adding almost 40 minutes to my drive, feeling foolish the entire time for listening to a warning from someone who wasn't even a real person as far as I could tell. I found out the next morning why I should have trusted her. I stopped at a gas station just before sunrise to fuel up, and the local news was playing on a small television behind the counter. The Miller Creek Bridge had partially collapsed sometime around 11 o'clock the night before, right around the time I would have been crossing it if I'd taken that exit. A support beam gave out with no warning. The reporter said if any vehicle had been on that bridge when it happened, there was almost no chance the driver would have survived the fall. I stood there staring at that screen for a long time. Then I asked the cashier, almost without thinking about it, if he knew anything about a girl named Mara who might have gone missing around here. He gave me a strange look and said he didn't know anyone by that name, but that there was an old story locals still talked about, a young woman who disappeared on a rainy night on that same stretch of road almost 15 years ago. Her car was found abandoned near the shoulder. She was never found. I never got a last name. I never got a photo to compare. I have no real proof that the girl in my truck that night was the same person from that old story. All I have is a seat that was wet, then dry, then wet again, and a warning that saved my life for reasons I will never fully understand. I still drive that same stretch of road sometimes because my job doesn't give me much choice. My old training supervisor's warning still rattles around in my head every time I pass a stranger standing alone on the shoulder, but now it sits next to a second thought that never used to be there, a small, quiet voice that wonders what would have happened to me if I had kept that rule perfectly that night. I never pick up hitchhikers, and I never will again. But I still find myself, every single time I pass that spot near the old bridge, slowing down just a little, checking the shoulder of the road, half hoping and half terrified that I will see her standing there again, soaked to the bone, waiting for someone else who needs to hear her warning.